on CityCast Nashville. My guest is Chaplain Darren Annalise Johnson. She's the co-chair of the Tennessee Equality Project's Davidson County Committee, and we're talking about a series of bills at the state legislature this session that appear to target our LGBTQIA plus neighbors and other marginalized groups. Some people call it the Slate of Hate. It's Monday, March 3rd. I'm your host, Marie Cecile Anderson, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Right now, there are bills on the table in Tennessee that could directly impact our LGBTQIA plus neighbors. These types of bills are often referred to as the Slate of Hate. Darren, do you think Slate of Hate is an accurate euphemism for these bills?
I wish that it wasn't, but I think that it is. Not to go to the deep end of the pool right off the bat, but the LGBTQIA plus community, as well as so many other communities, are really being targeted with legislation that pushes us out of the public sphere, makes life challenging in the most basic ways. I mean, when you're talking about bills that restrict bathroom access, that restrict children playing on sports teams, that limit or outlaw healthcare, the type of language that's been used to disparage immigrant and refugee communities, disabled folks, as well as LGBTQIA plus folks and so many other communities, it's hard to come to another conclusion than we're being used as political means to somebody else's ends, rather than treated as worthy, valued persons in and of ourselves. So I think you come right back down to a phrase like slate of hate to kind of say it all in just 3 words.
Well, now we're going to get into these bills that we're referring to.
Sure.
I'd like to focus on some of the big ones. So let's talk HB 304 from Rep. Gino Bolso, who lives in Brentwood, represents our friends down in Williamson County, and he's a big advocate of cousin marriage. This bill would ban pride flags or any other non-U.S. flags in public and charter schools, but critically, it also bans state and local government entities from flying anything but the Tennessee and U.S. flags on courthouses and public roads and sidewalks. Darren, what do the pride and transgender flags mean to you?
Well, I think the most basic thing is safety, welcome. One of the things that was repeated frequently in testimony and in conversations with legislators last year when another version of this bill was trying to be pushed through, there's huge debates among Republican members of the House about what these bills banned and what they allowed, with historical flags being sort of this key exception that would potentially allow Confederate flags, would allow Nazi flags, but wouldn't allow pride flags or trans flag, which isn't a statement of our trying to create a new country, but simply trying to signal welcome and safe space. There are so many places where I have to assess what my level of risk is in that moment, like folks who are brought up and that safety consciousness of walking through the parking lot and having your keys in your hand. I also have to be concerned about where risk might come from, and small things like a pride sticker or a pride flag. When I come into a town and I see that pride crosswalk like we have here in East Nashville, that allows me to know that there are safe spaces in community where maybe I don't have to sort of forward that sense of potential risk in the same way that I might have to in other communities and in other spaces. It is hugely important, I think, not just for me who lives here and has gotten to know my lovely neighbors over the years and so on, but for folks who are just moving here, coming into a different part of town or a new building or accessing government in a way that they haven't had to before, and just wondering, how am I going to be received in this space? So even that little sticker on on a lapel or a name badge or on the back of a computer monitor or on a flagpole outside or on a crosswalk. Those all signal you're welcome and you're safe here.
I have to mention, I just visited my 6-year-old twin nephews this past weekend, and one of them's favorite color is the rainbow. And so going into his room, there's a rainbow carpet. There's a rainbow comforter. There's rainbows all on the wall. And he's so young, he's in kindergarten, so I don't know if he truly understands, but he does understand that the rainbow is safe. It's welcoming, and it's his favorite color. I think that's so beautiful.
I gave the wordy example. You gave the perfect example. So we'll decide later which one of those should stand as the best one.
Right.
But that says everything, right? That it doesn't have to be understood as a grandiose statement, but simply, here is my broad arm embrace, says the community. Come on in.
So what would be the ramifications for Nashville if this bill passed?
One of the biggest concerns here is simply its overreach, right? Because of how broadly it's worded. It would really limit the ability for individual communities and municipalities to be able to do things that they have historically done as signs of welcome and safety in their own communities. There is reason why Nashville citizens advocated for, came out and with their own happy labor, happy sweat, came out and painted that rainbow crosswalk. And then when somebody tried to deface it, came back and helped bring it back up to the shape that they had just made it, because that was an important symbol to that community. And bills like this really would try to limit or bar municipalities, cities like Nashville, from being able to make simple displays like that really represent and reflect the lives of the many citizens and residents they have in their area.
And would it affect our Pride Festival?
I mean, that's certainly a concern, right? The festival itself takes place in a big public park in the center of Nashville. I won't say that its locations thumbs its nose at its up the hill neighbor in the form of the Capitol, but it certainly sits there on the hill in plain view. And the city's support of the festival and what the festival brings to the city. I mean, let's just talk about it as a commercial enterprise that's good for the revenue of the city. It brings in 100,000 plus folks over the weekend that it's here, and all the dollars and all the tourism and all the interest in Nashville that creates. But with a bill like this, the city would be limited in showing its support in the ways that it historically has, whether that's hanging a pride flag, on a light post in the park or something like that. I think that we would really need to be concerned that those things would be restricted in the language of this bill as it is.
And a similar bill, as you mentioned, did not pass last year. What is the likelihood of this bill passing now?
I certainly think that a lot of the same concerns can be raised, like what it allows versus what it limits. And then I think the big one is not so much an LGBTQIA plus issue or a Black Lives Matter issue, which would also restrict those type of flags as well. But that, again, it really tries to tell municipalities, cities, towns, what they can do to show support for the communities that live within their jurisdiction. And there's no version of small government that justifies that type of overreach.
Let's move to the next bill, HB 64, also from Gino Bolso. As introduced, this bill would require all residential educational programs in the state, regardless of type or duration, that allows minors to participate or to access residential facilities, to segregate all restrooms, changing areas, and showers by immutable biological sex. Darren, what does residential educational programs mean?
That is a funny phrase, isn't it?
It is. I was confused.
I wonder if they may be trying to say more than those 3 words might indicate right there. There are many concerns with this bill, as there are with any type of bill that seeks to ban folks from using facilities that match their gender identity. Transmasculine folks using women's restrooms, that's a risk. Me using a men's restroom, that's a risk. When we require folks to follow restrictions like a bill like this tries to put in place, that we're really putting them in harm's way, despite all the fear-mongering and false claims about the risks that not enacting legislation like this actually creates. I can guarantee you that the most scared person, the most anxious person in a public restroom is always going to be the trans or gender diverse person. We're the ones who've been vilified as these marauding folks, trying to invade spaces. And again, it's the marauding, it's the invading language that's used to really other us and challenge us to even sort of step foot in the public sphere. And then language like this that applies to, as you noted, quite rightly, residential educational programs, regardless of type or duration. That's not just a ritzy boarding school, right? That's going to be a church camp during the summer. So the reach of this is really quite broad. And as was brought up in testimony by other Republicans on the Education Administration Subcommittee last week, forces a cost mandate on these facilities, on these schools, on these quote unquote residential educational programs that maybe they don't have the ability or interest in paying just to comply with the state's law.
Would this mean people who homeschool would have to potentially build an extra bathroom?
I'm not legal scholar enough to be able to answer that precisely, but I would say that at this stage of the game, that certainly any question is a good question to ask. I mean, does it include that homeschool setting where you have 3 or 4 children from the neighborhood gathering together to get a learning opportunity? I think the hope is that we don't ask these types of questions and then find out after the fact exactly what the ramification of it is.
I'd like to read something that Bolso said. The purpose of this bill is to protect girls, protect young ladies and their privacy. Bolso said he considers the measure an issue of public health and safety. Some parents really believe their cisgendered children are in danger, and they have big feelings about this. What do you say to them?
I would really want to lean in to what the specifics of those are, because again, there are language games being played here. And the language that they're using in this is feeling something along the lines of feeling violated in places of privacy. Feeling violated, ooh, that's scary. Places of privacy, eeks, what are those? And yet, they're not actually telling us where the actual incident or occurrence or harmful action happened. Does feeling violated in places of privacy mean I just felt uncomfortable in a locker room? Well, welcome to the club. Guy, gal, however you understand yourself, locker rooms are generally not like the most cozy place for any of us.
Right.
So feeling uncomfortable in a space like that just comes with the territory. And then let's be honest, right? There's not many trans folks in the world. So I understand that people are going to feel a little odd in a space where a gender diverse person might be. Then the question becomes, does it become that gender diverse person's problem to help reduce your anxiety? Or is that an opportunity for you to ask yourself, hold up, where's this anxiety coming from? And how do I process that for myself in a way that allows other people to exist who might also be uncomfortable in this moment as we're getting changed to go about the rest of our day, or just trying to use the bathroom, or just do our business, right? And then move on. we're going to restrict everybody from being in contact with anybody if we go about saying, well, I didn't feel comfortable around this person, therefore that person shouldn't be allowed into this space anymore. If that was a rule that we had for going to the grocery store or the drugstore or to the movies or anywhere else, we would never have contact with anyone. Right? We would never have interactions with anyone. And in a space like a bathroom where, again, all of us are just doing something that all humans need to do, we got to find ways to keep people just moving in and out of there without saying, I'm sorry, this bathroom is only allowed for this type of person. We've lived through that era, especially in the South. We should know better by now.
We're back with Chaplain Darren Annalise Johnson to discuss one more bill. It's HB 315, shockingly from Gino Bolso again, as well as Senator Mark Pody, who lives in Lebanon and is the only Republican to represent a tiny little corner of Davidson County. As introduced, this bill enacts the Tennessee Covenant Marriage Act to create covenant marriage, which is entered into by one male and one female who understand and agree that marriage is a lifelong relationship, permits a spouse in a covenant marriage to obtain a judgment of divorce under certain circumstances. Okay, so to be honest, I thought this was like an Onion article or just like a fake thing on TikTok that I saw floating around, but it is indeed real. So what is a covenant marriage?
I mean, I could launch into particulars, but I would say, yeah, the question begs the question, right? We have methods to obtain license for marriage in this state already. What is the point of establishing a type of marriage that, and I believe you said that this was restricted to certain types of people in a certain type of relationship, right? That would then be harder legally for them to get out of. You had joked earlier about cousin marriage. I would say that a key thing to hold on to, both with this bill and with that argument, sort of allowing cousins to marry, that those things have long history with trying to undermine the Obergefell Supreme Court decision, as a matter of fact, that valorizing or raising up cousin marriage was a way of sort of doing a reduction to absurdity argument about what the Obergefell same-sex marriage decision allowed, right? So they were saying, oh, fine, if you're going to allow this, then we're going to allow all these other types of marriage too, right? And then with this bill, rather than trying to do that reduction to absurdity argument, they're trying to say, well, if you're going to allow marriage, same-sex couples in this one type of marriage, then we want a special type of marriage all for our own that's completely separate, that's only available to cis-presenting and biologically identified, right? Because when you add language like one male and one female, then you're binding yourself to the state's definitions of what those are, which have very particular trans-exclusionary, gender-diverse exclusionary definitions within the Tennessee Code, into a relationship that then becomes harder to get out of. So we certainly have a concern that for a covenant marriage, that if there was an abusive relationship, that for those who decide to enter into it, they would be harder to get out. If you think about other bills that are before the legislature this term, like the prescription mifepristone contraception bills, those have charges attached to them. Well, who would be the people that could bring those charges? They would be most likely the spouse or partner of the person using those prescriptions. And if you're in a relationship that doesn't allow you to get out of it as easily, then you're setting up a situation that has such an imbalanced power dynamic that if you have an abusive person in that relationship, you're really setting them up for a bad situation. But on its face, the bill itself is problematic because it is part of a larger effort to say, well, if you're going to allow same-sex marriage under the Supreme Court decision, we just want a wholly separate institution. Now, we know that when we get our marriage license from the county clerk, that we are entering in a certain type of legal binding arrangement, but that doesn't say anything about the faith settings and our understanding of what those vows mean to us and how each of us individually and in the sake of a marriage, corporately as a couple, come to understand and hold ourselves responsible to those relationships is entirely up to us. That's up to our sense of relationship and faith and morals and so on. And that's the one place that the state shouldn't be trying to insert itself. And I'll just add that in the states that have enacted anything like this, they're really not used hardly at all. So then we're creating this whole separate pathway at state's cost, at county clerk's cost, at municipalities' cost, right? Because they'd have to create the structures around this as well. So problematic foundations, problematic in its implementation, problematic in its potential outcomes and utility. Just, I don't know if you've gotten this yet, problematic from start to finish.
Well, so yeah, the word covenant to me, it has Christian undertones to it. So where is conservative Christianity in all this? Our state Republicans, like you said, they don't have a great track record of separating church and state.
I think this is yet another example of certain legislators trying to use the state to forward, if not force, a specific understanding of faith on all of us. And this, of course, is part of a larger picture where we're seeing a number of folks in our state government who supposedly represent all of us, though bills like this certainly beg that question as well, too, that tries to forward a specific religious understanding of how to proceed in life, how we should make choices on a day-to-day basis, and then criminalizes or problematizes any other way forward. So a bill like the covenant marriage bill really shows how far certain folks are willing to try to push a specific type of religious perspective onto all of us in this state, regardless of what faith I hold dearly, my training and my role as a chaplain, or non-faith or diffuse faith or specific faith that may or may not align with those people trying to run this type of legislation, and yet bill after bill trying to really forward a specific Christian with a capital C agenda to the point where I feel like I have to kind of justify my own type of faith and Christian life. I'm pragmatic Christian naturalist, switch those words around however you want to try to describe me. But I take my faith very seriously. But I still don't fit inside the box that any of these bills tries to create, which, last but not least, goes to the point of any of these LGBTQIA plus bills or any of these anti-immigrant or anti-refugee bills, the bills that ban DEI programs. All of these bills are meant to create a single type of acceptable life in our public sphere and in our communities to the exclusion of everyone else.
Well, so it's often said here in Tennessee doesn't pass laws. We pass lawsuits. It's something people say as a joke, like, don't worry, the courts will stop a lot of these. And we're hearing that obviously with a lot of the Trump administration as well. But is that statement in any way helpful when the laws are personally targeting you?
I suppose that it allows some hope over the long haul, but that system, that checks and balances arm of our checks and balances system has also been so deeply problematized in so many ways that it begs the question of their autonomy of decision making. And even if we have decisions that support the sort of full range of human existence that I feel that so many of these lawsuit bills, to use your language, are really trying to restrict, we still have to suffer the initial injury, the initial existential uncertainty of how we can go through our day. What spaces can we feel safe in? Where is somebody going to react out of the fear, the language of these bills and those who are trying to forward them put into the atmosphere? Who's going to buy into that and make my next experience one of higher risk than it needs to be? I still have a family to go home to. I still have a child I need to pick up from school at the end of the day today, like any other parent and any other family. And yet all of these bills, regardless of where they end up in the judicial system, I still got to live, and so many other folks have got to live with the fear and uncertainty of what bills like this create. I'm just trying to get to the end of the day. I'm just trying to get my HVAC system to work when it's 8 degrees outside, like everybody else goes, right?
We're just human, right?
Just human being human out here.
Right.
And yet these bills problematize our very place in the grocery store line, our very place in the community, regardless of how and where they end up judicially. So I know that doesn't precisely answer your question, but I think it tries to get at the experience of having to navigate all of this awful lawsuit spaghetti that they're trying to throw up against the wall, right? Just to see what sticks. What they're trying to do is, well, let's see if we can throw out this type of life. Let's see if we can diminish this type of existence. Let's see if we can abolish this type of history. And even if some of it sticks, well, we're closer to our goal of this restricted normative idea of what human life should be like and what our communities should be like. And I'm a big believer that our communities are as rich as they are, and that we are enriched and others are enriched, and we get to move towards places of fuller flourishing when we all get to bring the fullness of ourself into common space, into common community. And so treating folks, again, in this means rather than valuable ends ways, that just doesn't even match with my faith or my theology, that we're all inherently valuable children of God that deserve to be treated as such, both by our neighbors and, importantly, in this case, by our legislature.
Well, we're coming to an end here, and I'd like to end with just one simple question, and that is, what keeps you in Tennessee?
I've lived a variety of places throughout my life. I was born in Buffalo, adopted there by my parents. 6 months later, we moved to Kynards, Georgia, and I have lived a predominant amount of my life in the South, but also in many other states around the country, from Indiana to Hawaii to Connecticut to Virginia to Tennessee. And we've been here for 21 years now. We've raised our family here. We've had medical crises here. We've navigated life here. The way that I was able to see these United States when I was young is how we could pick up and create home anywhere. And I don't want to cede that possibility, to cede that reality to those who would only want a certain type of person living a certain type of life in their specific state. This community, any community, is for all of us. That's the Nashville that I love. It's the East Nashville and Inglewood that I appreciate so much. I'm in somebody's tool shed basically right now, folks. For those of you who don't know, there's a whole story about it. But I just found a place in East Nashville where this amazing neighbor has a studio in his backyard that I was able to come. Why should I have to move somewhere else and miss out on all these amazing folks and amazing opportunities around me just because some folks don't like the type of person that I and so many other members of our community are? No, ma'am. No, sir. No, whoever. this place is for all of us. And as long as I can find ways to keep my family safe, to have options for good schools, to have lovely community and work here, then I'm going to stay right here and keep on trying to show how I'm just trying to live a good and productive life like everyone around me is as well.
Thank you. We're so grateful to have you here.
Well, thank you for the opportunity of this conversation. That is what helps make this happen for all of us. So whether it's you, Marie, or to anybody who hears this, I really mean this. Thank you for you, because each and all of us is what helps make this community strong, whoever, however, and wherever we are in our world and in our lives.
And that's how you end a podcast, folks. That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Toodles!